Okay, so this is the 10-2 Try These A on page 124. We did part A, I guess. We did part A as a bell ringer, and so some of you were absent and some of you were just having a hard time following, so I decided it was worth doing again. So the first step in our step chart that we made in our composition book says to distribute. So I notice there's some parentheses here, which means I need to distribute. My 2 has to stay put because it is not being multiplied to the parentheses. So this gives me negative 3 over 2 times x, which is just negative 3 over 2x. And then I have negative 3 over 2 times 1, which any number times 1 is just itself. So that gives me negative 3 over 2. So step 1 is done. I distributed. Everything on the right side just stays as it is. The second step says to collect like terms. Well, I have just a number 2 here and just a number negative 3/2 here, so I can combine those. The negative 3/2, nothing's going to happen there. Okay, it's going to stay by itself, and also nothing's going to happen on this side because they're already like unlike terms, so everything's already combined. The problem that students were having yesterday is knowing that 2 minus 3/2, what is that? Okay, so we have trouble adding and subtracting fractions just as a class. There's some of us that are very good at it and some of us that still struggle. Now, the way that we always have learned is we need a least common denominator. So that means this is 2 over 1, and I could find a least common denominator. But what I want to suggest, just to save time, is that this is 2 minus 1.5. If I write 3 over 2 as a mixed number instead of an improper fraction, I can see that if I have 2 of something and I subtract off 1.5 of that thing, that I'm only going to have half left. So I think I used the analogy of pizza in class. If I have 2 pizzas and someone eats 1.5 of them, I only have half a pizza left. So, and it's a positive half a pizza. So here I'm going to have plus 1/2. Now, if you'd like to go ahead and find the least common denominator, that can happen. The least common denominator would be 2. So that means my 3 over 2 wouldn't change. And then 2 over 1, I multiplied the bottom by 2, so I have to multiply the top by 2. So that gives me 4 over 2. And then if I subtract, remember my denominator stays the same, and that gives me 1/2. So no matter which way you want to solve it, it works the same, but I just think this is a little bit quicker and saves us time. So anyway, this answer goes over here because that's what I was doing, was combining these 2 like terms, and now I have this equation. Okay, so now it says after I combine like terms that I need to get all the variables on one side of the equation. So because this is negative, I'm going to go ahead and add 3/2 x to both sides, just to avoid having more negatives over here. So this gives me 0x, and my half just comes down. So now I have 6 plus 3/2, or to save time again, I have 6 plus 1.5. So that gives me 7.5. But I don't want to have whole numbers and fractions together. I don't want mixed numbers in my equation. The reason why is because they get left behind. They're one number, but they look like 2 numbers. So in algebra and in pre-algebra, we write this as an improper fraction instead of a mixed number. So if you remember, to get 7.5 into one fraction, I have to do 2 times 7 plus 1. So that's 14, plus 1 is 15. That's the same as 15/2. Okay, do you remember? Hopefully we remember that we do a C there, starting at the bottom. Okay, so 15/2 x is how many x's I have now when I combine 6 and 3.5 x's. And then my negative 9 just comes down. So there's quite a bit of side work going on over here. So I just don't want you to be intimidated by that. It's okay to have side work, and every problem that we work, the more complicated, see, this is getting complicated, right? We've already had 1, 2, 3 steps. we still have at least 2 more steps to go. So the more steps, the more likely we're going to have some side work. Okay, so all my variables are on one side. I need to get all my numbers on the other. So now this side says I have 9.5, but I'm going to write 9.5 here. And I need to make it an improper fraction. So 9 times 2 is 18 plus 1 is 19 halves. So I'm running out of space here. So I have 19 halves equals, and then I have this 15.5x because this goes away. Sorry, it's so crammed in there. The last step is to multiply or divide by the number being, happening to x so that I can solve my equation. So I have this fraction being multiplied to x. If you remember from the 10-1 videos, that means I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal. So I flip this fraction and multiply it. I really am making a mess here. So the 15s cancel out, the 2's cancel out. That just gives me 1x over here on the right. And I'm flipping it because all my students like to have the x on the left. And then my 2's cancel here, which gives me 19 over 5. And that is my answer. I don't need a decimal. I could put that back into a mixed number to get a whole number. If I do that, that's going to equal 1 4/15. I accept both of these answers, but I would not accept a decimal because there are no decimals in the problem. So no decimals in the problem, no decimals in the answer. That's the rule, okay? Now if we go down to B, there are decimals in my question, so there can be decimals all the way through my work. So we did this one on Plickers in most of my classes, not all of them. I think 1 or 2 missed out on it. So again, it's worth the review here. So first step is to distribute. So I have 2 times x is 2x. 2 times 0.7 is 1.4. If you're not sure, go ahead and use your calculator. 6 times x is 6x, right? And then 6 times 0.8, oh, it's negative. Almost missed my sign there. It's negative 0.8 or subtracting, so that makes it a negative. Positive times a negative is a negative, and that gives me 4.8. Okay, so then I collect like terms. Everything looks collected on each side. So now I need to move some x's around. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract 2x because, again, I will have negatives if I subtract 6x. Which isn't a big deal. Some people don't care, but just to make it simple, I know 6 is bigger than 2, so it'll stay positive. So that gives me 1.4 over on this side and 4x here. And I just bring down my minus 4.8. So now I need to get the numbers on the same side or move it away from my variable. So I'm going to add 4.8 to both sides. So that gives me 4x on this side because this cancels out. That equals 0. And over here I get 6.2. The last but not least is to divide or multiply to get rid of whatever's by x. This happens to be multiplied, so I'm going to divide both sides by 4 to give me 1x is going to equal, I'm going to put that in my calculator, it's 1.55. And I skipped the check step in part A because I frankly just have no more room, but I could definitely put 1.5 up here for each x and check. I could also put 19 over 5 up here for this x, and I should get the same answer both times. So yes, I'm skipping the check step just for time on a video, but you should not skip it in your homework or on a test or quiz. Okay, so here I am to part C. First step is to distribute, and I do have distribution happening because there's a parentheses with a multiply, right? I added the multiplication sign because the number outside the parentheses means multiplication, which then means I need to use the distributive property. This side, nothing's happening, so I'm just going to rewrite it. 1/3 times x is 1/3 x. 1/3 times -9. Okay, so 1/3 times negative, and that's 9 over 1. And here I can do some canceling. Now, if I didn't recognize that, I could just say that's negative 9 over 3 and then do the division. 9 divided by 3 is 3, and it happens to be negative. But I also see that 3 goes into 3, 3 goes into 9. Same answer. Okay, so over here I'm going to have negative 3. Okay, so now collect like terms on both sides. I have that already done. These are different terms. Now get all the variables on one side. So 1/3 is less than 2, so I'm going to subtract 1/3 x from both sides. And on this side, that gives me a negative 3 that I just brought down. I'm going to bring down my negative 10. Over here, I have side work again. So I have 2 minus 1/3. Okay, so this means I can do this in my head and know that if I have 2 pizzas and 1/3 of it is gone, that I'll have 1 2/3 pizza left. If you cannot do that in your head, you need to find a least common denominator, which would be 3. Okay, 3 on the bottom of both fractions. The third's going to stay the same. But over here I multiplied by 3 for the bottom, so 3 for the top gives me 6 over 3. That is the same as 2, right? And then 6 minus 1 is 5/3. Well, I actually want 5/3 here because it's improper. And this I would have to go ahead and change to improper. So 3 times 1 is 3, plus 2 is 5. So see, same answer regardless of which direction you need to go. I'm showing both ways, so pick the way that you like the best. Okay, we want to make sure we're not making mistakes in adding and subtracting because we're doing algebra. So it's, even more important we don't lose numbers somewhere. Now I have all my variables on one side. I need to add 10 to both sides to get my numbers on the other side. So 5/3x equals, and this is basically 10 minus 3, which is 7. Last step, multiply or divide to get x by itself. Sorry, my dog is in here with me. I don't know if you can hear her or not. Her name's Sophia. She's being whiny. So I have a fraction outside, so I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal. Okay, which these all cancel out, gives me 1x. This is like 7 over 1, so I multiply across the top, which gives me 21. 7 times 3, and then 1 times 5. And that does not reduce at all. That is completely reduced. So you can leave it like this. This would be my final answer. Or if you want to put it back into a mixed number, that would give you 4 1/5. And both answers would be okay, but just, again, no decimals because I have a fraction in my problem. Even if I had no fractions, it was all whole numbers, I need fractions in my answer. The only time you can give me decimals is when there's decimals in the original problem. Okay, and now I have D. Nothing's happening over here. In fact, everything's collected. And I do have the distributive property happening here. So 2x minus 8. And again, I have like terms over on this side. I have x's in both of these terms, so I need to add them together. That gives me 5x, and then my minus 8 is just going to come down. I have 8 minus x over here. Now I need to get all my x's together, which means I'm going to add this x because it's being subtracted to get 0 x's on this side. And if I add x to this side, I have to add x to this side, which gives me 6x. So all my x's are on the right. I need to get my numbers on the left. Add 8 to both sides. This gives me 16 equals 6x. Right? Yes. Okay. And then I need to divide both sides by 6 because 6 is being multiplied to x. Now before I write my final answer, this can be reduced, I see, by a factor of 2. So if I take 2 out of the bottom, that leaves me 3. If I divide 2 into 16, that gives me 8. So my final answer, reduced fraction, is 8/3. Okay, if you wanted to write that as a mixed number, 3 goes into 8 2 times with 2 left over, 2 2/3. Okay, there's just one more. Let's try these E. Okay, and we have a distribution of 1/2 going in. Now these are nice even numbers. If I multiply by 1/2, it's the same as dividing by 2. So I know that 18 divided by 2 is 9x, and that 8 divided by 2 is 4, and I just need to remember that is a negative. So that's all that happened there. Now I have to get all my variables on one side, so I'm going to subtract 6x from 9x and get 0 there. That gives me 7/2. And then if I subtract, I get 3x minus 4. And now I need to get all my numbers on the other side, so add 4. That'll give me 3x equals, so now I have 7/2 plus 4/1. Okay, so let's just go ahead and do least common denominator. I could put this back in a mixed number and then add the 4 whole numbers to it, but I think I'm just going to do least common denominator on this one. So 2 is going to be my least common denominator, and that's going to give me 8/2, because if I do 8 divided by 2, that gives me 4, so I know I did it right. And add them together, 8 plus 7 is 15/2. So I have 15/2 on this side. Okay, now I need to divide both sides by 3. And remember, when we divide fractions, we do a keep the first fraction, change the sign, flip the second fraction. So this becomes the keep, change, flip. And here I can do some canceling. 3 goes into 3 once, 3 goes into 15 5 times. That gives me 5/2. So x equals 5/2. If you were going to go ahead, excuse me, let me make sure, I think my answer, did not get the same answer twice. Let me just make sure and double check my work here. Make sure I wrote the problem down right. Oh, I missed a negative. I see where my mistake is right here. That's a negative. Okay, shoot. So that means I need to come back up here. This is going to change my answer. So let me just erase all this. See, even teachers make mistakes. And good thing I checked my work, right? Went back, I have already worked this problem a few times. Okay, so I'm adding 4 to negative 7/2. Okay, so this would be just 1/2 left over. Big difference. Negative 7 plus 8 is just 1. So 1/2. So over here I have 3x equals 1/2. Big difference. And then divide by 3. Okay, so that's going to give me the same little weird thing that's happened over here. 1/2 times 1/3. Keep, change, flip. And that gives me 1/5. And that, I'm sorry, 1/6. We can't add the bottom, we have to multiply. So 3 times 2 is 6. Goodness. Okay, I need another cup of coffee, I guess. All right, so x equals 1/6. All right, and that is my final answer. That is what I got the other times I worked this problem. All right, I'm just going to do one more problem that's in the Try These B, C. I am not going to do the B problem. So this is on page 125. And then the B question is on page 126, but I'm skipping that because it is not worded correctly. When I started to work that problem, the way they have it with percents and everything, it is not mathematically stated correctly, so I don't want to correct Springboard book math while I'm doing the problem. I think this is hard enough as it is. So we're just going to do part A here, which is on page 125. And it says 2/5 a number. So I'm going to write that down. 2/5. This really is like of a number, and of we know is multiply. So I'm just going to say n. You can use x or any letter that you want to represent the number, but that's the variable. Increased by, okay, so that's added. Increased by 6 is equal to, that's nice because is equal to is just equals 3/4 the number, so there's 3/4 of the number, decreased by 8. So we just need to do a little translation here, and then it says we need to solve it. So again, fractions are not going away, so we have to be able to do this. Now I need to know, is 2/5 bigger or smaller than 3/4? So if you're not sure, you would put this in your calculator. 2 divided by 5 equals 0.4, and 3 divided by 4 equals 0.75. So 0.4 is smaller, so I'm going to subtract 2/5 n from both sides. And it's only to avoid negatives. If you did it the other way, you would just have a negative number in front of your n, and you just need to make sure that at the end you don't lose your negative. I just feel like this is an easier way to not lose negatives. So again, I have side work, 3/4 minus 2/5. There's no avoiding it. I have to have a least common denominator, which in this case is going to be 20. Okay, so here would be 5. 4 times 5 is 20. 3 times 5 is 15. 4 times 5 is 20. 4 times 2 is 8. So I have 15 minus 8, which equals, let me see, that's 7. Is that right? And cannot be reduced. So good. We did it right. 7/20. All right, so over here I have 7/20 n minus 8. The 8 just comes down, and my 6 comes down over here. And then I need to get my numbers on the same side, so add 8. So that gives me 14 here, 0 here, and then 7/20 n. I have a fraction, so I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal. It makes all these go away, but what I do to one side, I have to do to the other. Right? This gives me n equals, now this is set 14 over 1, and I can see 7 goes into 7 once, 7 goes into 14 twice. 20 times 2 is 40. Okay, so that's my final answer. Now I would plug 40 back in up here, make sure it works. Okay, actually let me just do the check step because I have been skipping it all along, and I want to make sure that you know what I mean by check step. So 2/5 n is 40 plus 6 equals 3/4 n is 40 minus 8. Okay, so here this is my first fraction, multiply. PEMDAS says I multiply before I add, so this gives me 8 times 2 is 16 plus 6. Over here, 4 goes into 4 once, 4 goes into 40 10 times, that's 30 minus 8. 6 plus 16 is what? Let's see, 6 and 6 is 12, carry the 1, 22. Okay, plus 6, and then over here, we said 30 minus 8. Oh, looky there. It checks. So that would be how you would do that check step. Okay, and so I will be making another video on the practice that's at the end of the chapter if you still need some more practice. All right, see you in class.